Since 1866, there has been an insane asylum in St. Peter, Minnesota. Currently, the Minnesota Security Hospital is in turmoil. Since the torture cases in 2011, the old way of doing business has been held in contention. Torture was the backbone of the establishment prior to that time. It was never a torture chamber in its official capacity, but the threat was always there. Inmates were commonly told by staff and guards that they could be killed at any time in the official enforcement of rules. This all changed in 2011 when this unique way of doing business was brought to light. An inmate had been locked into a solitary confinement cell for 25 days with no mattress. This was in November and December of 2011, and the inmate was forced to sleep on a concrete slab for nearly a month. There were some stated reasons for this. The inmate had destroyed mattresses he had been given. He blocked the window into his cell with pieces of the mattresses he had been given. The staff clearly took matters into their own hands and decided force was called for. The guard culture was a key factor here. Just as the Black Lives Matter campaign points out police culture in the killing of black men, we have at the security hospital a form of guard culture. The enforcement of domination on the inmate with the mattress problem was simply dealt with by the philosophy of, if he wants to screw with us, we will screw with him. It became an issue of control and identifying who was the boss. The staff felt they were not being life-threatening and that their enforcement of dominance was just and ultimately therapeutic. The blindness factor, however, is that they felt the only mistake they made was in getting prosecuted for an event that was taken out of context in a place where domination and discipline were needed. The Stanford experiment showed how psychological tortures and abuses naturally arise in cases of one group imprisoning and dominating another group. Invariably, guards became abusive tyrants, and prisoners became rebellious and disorderly. In the mattress incident, we saw guard culture and abuse come to the forefront. Guards felt they were entirely justified in imprisoning and torturing an inmate that had gone beyond fair treatment practices. This went on for 25 days. The hospital administrator resigned and a new hospital administrator was hired. His name was David Prophet. He fired the psychiatrist who had led the treatment team during the mattress incident. Other staff were also fired. Then the psychiatrists who felt that the firing of their fellow doctor was unethical began to retaliate. They quit their jobs as a total group. This left 400 psychiatric patients without any ability to modify prescriptions for nearly a year. There was an official record and a public record. The psychiatrists were a dictatorial horror to deal with. They ruled as enlightened despots and a benevolent dictatorship. They actually believed that a thoughtless autocracy was the best way of doing business. Now the doctors have been replaced with nurse practitioners, and the dictatorship, the autocracy, has been swept aside and replaced with a more team-oriented process. Currently, the guards are trying to win back their role as torturers and despots. They feel that these powers are necessary to provide an environment that is safe for them and the inmate population. The powers they seek are formally called implementation of restraints and seclusions. This involves putting patients into leather harnesses and/or placing inmates into solitary confinement cells. The governor is keen on seeing the system not go back to what it was. Staff say they need these powers, but historically there have been problems. The third point to the request for staff safety are the requests for more staffing. Here is one point in which the inmates and staff agree. More staff means staff on duty don't feel threatened by inmates. In the early part of the new millennium, there was another incident that rarely comes into discussion. Jamal Rice was killed by the guards at the Minnesota Security Hospital. They got him into a takedown scenario and piled 10 guards on top of him to get him to stop resisting and establish dominance. This worked well until they got up off of him and found out the reason he was not resisting was that he was dead. This resulted in an administrative change in that these takedown scenarios had formerly been called panics. During a panic, there was a call over the intercom system that directed all available guards to the residence unit where the unruly behavior was occurring. Then the inmate would be taken down with a group gathered together to assert superior force and thus dominance. This failed in the case of Jamal Rice. As Rice died, the system was replaced with an Incident Command System, or ICS, but it was essentially the same. The paperwork and takedown procedure were modified. In both the Rice death and the mattress incident, the control exerted by the guards was brought into question. In the Rice death, the obvious problem was staffing numbers. The guards had felt intimidated and threatened, and they responded in a massive display of force. They killed the man because he had frightened them. The obvious remedy is to give guards enough numbers that they do not feel threatened and compelled to kill the inmate in question. Appropriate staffing numbers is a must, and it protects both staff who want powers to torture and inmates who want to be unruly. A third incident materialized. Michael Douglas was murdered by Darnell Whitefeather in winter of 2014. Douglas and Whitefeather had been placed onto Unit 800. This living area was popularly known as the Dungeon Unit and was the place of last resort for unruly behavior. The mattress incident was on Unit 800. Rice had been killed on Unit 800. Whitefeather was on Unit 800 while waiting to be transferred in a question of competency to stand trial. The Competency Restoration Program had sent Whitefeather to Unit 800 because he had been unruly on their unit. Whitefeather beat Douglas to death while out of the sight of the guards. The guards found Douglas's bloody corpse in his room. Whitefeather was ultimately tried and sentenced to 19 years in prison for the Douglas murder. Staffing is thus the clearest problem in the Rice and Douglas deaths. The mattress incident was only a publicity case. For the first time, the inmate complaints were taken seriously. Coercion, torture, and abuse happen on a daily basis. But for the first time in history, the staff actually got caught at it and got fired. Now the governor wants to take powers away from the guards and give the inmates a torture-free existence. The problem with that, however, is that many of the inmates do suffer from profound illnesses and violent behavior. About 20% of the inmate population actually should be incarcerated. True, the security hospital is used as an off-the-books prison for sweeping the politically embarrassing into a dustbin that is difficult to escape from. But that's not what the Supreme Court hears when splitting hairs of constitutionality. The High Court hears that this is a hospital and not a prison, while being oblivious to the presence of torture. Many of these detainees need to be detained somewhere. There are people who have committed brutal murders and rapes. Women and children and parents have lost their lives because of the 20% of the inmate population whose detentions are ethical. This leaves us with the problems of which 80% of the inmates should be relocated and which powers should the guards get to feel less threatened. Rice lost his life because the guards felt threatened. Powers can keep guards from feeling threatened. How can the governor and the guards all come together and be happy with each other? Rather than answer that problem, let's look at an additional problem. Women as employees are an unnecessary risk. Hiring of guards should be no different at the task of crew safety than is hiring for firemen and prison guards at Stillwater Prison. Women are more fragile. This job description is a combat role. The complaints so far that there is a threat to staff and a need for leather mobile restraints and solitary confinement and safety for staff, especially women. Historically, solitary confinement and leather restraints have been used to torture and dominate inmates. Some of this is appropriate, but most of it is not. Hiring women guards in an indiscriminate fashion is ridiculous. Special women have survived the Army's Ranger School, but most do not. A rare elite is tolerable, but not a statistically significant attempt at equality. In this situation, there is a very discriminating stressor. Presently, the guards and governor do not agree. We shall see about that. David Prophet was ousted only a few months after being given the job of repairing the security hospital of the damage done to it by the mattress incident. The nurse practitioners owe their existence to the poor care decisions of the doctors. While profit may have been a flawed gem, our nurse practitioners and the governors push to remove torture, humiliation, coercion, and unnecessary forms of dominance are truly the light at the end of the tunnel. Things are getting better. Guards try now to get these powers back. Staffing is needed because when we see staff acting out of fear, we get dead bodies as a result. The legal process that gets people to security is one that doesn't involve trials or evidence. These are called commitments in civil law, which includes things like lawsuits, divorce, and mental health. The most powerful of these is called the indefinite or mentally ill and dangerous commitment. It is an open-ended life imprisonment term. There is no end. It is a life sentence. There is the possibility of parole, but for many it is a life sentence. There is no trial. There are no lawyers or jury. The only evidence is supplied by the police. It is a hearing, and the standard of evidence is not beyond reasonable doubt, as in criminal law. The standard is called a preponderance of the evidence, and hearsay is viewed as evidence. It is essentially a kangaroo court where the accused is found guilty before the trial. The judges and lawyers are all the rich class socioeconomically speaking, while the accused are almost always poor. Evidence is immaterial, as all it takes to achieve life imprisonment is 2 doctors' signatures and that of a judge, and life imprisonment is achieved. The old standard was 1. Was there a significant crime? 2. Was there a mental illness on the part of the accused? 3. Was there a likelihood of the crime being repeated? The older standard was fairly concrete, but the new interpretations of these 3 requirements are now being revisited. There have been commitments for as small a crime as breaking a window or a 5th-degree assault. The bottom line here is that the state will use all of its powers to enforce a chemical straitjacket onto the accused in the form of psychiatric medication. All civil rights, trial rights, and amendments to the Bill of Rights will be ignored until the state gets to impose a chemical state in the accused that is to the state's liking.
Yeah, so tell me about what is an MIND commitment?
Oh my goodness, I'll have to go back into my memory. An MIND commitment is a civil procedure whereby the state has the right to confine you and remove your liberty even though you haven't committed a crime. You have to be found mentally ill, and you have to be found more than dangerous to yourself or others in the sense of only a plain civil commitment as mentally ill. You have to have been found to committed or attempted to committed what I'll just generally refer to as a dangerous act.
Sure.
That act can vary across the board. Obviously, if you commit the act, it's easier for the court to find you mentally ill and dangerous. If you haven't committed the act, if you've only attempted to commit the act, it's maybe a little harder, but again, it depends on the nature of the act. Lost my train of thought. Let's just go back again. I think it's important for people to understand how the law evolved on just civil commitments, because constitutionally it was always impermissible to take away one's liberty, one's freedom, unless they had actually committed an act, a crime, for example. You were always allowed, going back to good old English common law, to put away a criminal who had committed an act that constituted a crime. You could deprive him of his liberty. You were not allowed So you're still not allowed to incarcerate a quote criminal on the assumption that he might commit a crime in the future. That's still unconstitutional. So then why is it that you can take away a mentally ill person's liberty on the assumption that they might do something dangerous in the future?
Right.
Well, that's one of the exceptions that courts have hammered out. That is one of the few exceptions where you can deprive someone of their liberty, not so much based on what they have done, but what they might do in the future. And again, you can deprive a person who's just mentally ill of his liberty. You can deprive him of that based on the fact that he might be dangerous to himself or others in the future. That's a decision the court gets to make after listening to so-called expert testimony. And again, then the distinction between just the mentally ill person being committed and the person being committed as mentally ill and dangerous is the severity of the danger that has either happened or might happen.
Right.
And it evolved over the years. The court can look back into a person's history. They can look far back into a person's history to see what kind of dangerous acts they might have done in the past, and they can use that in committing a person as mentally ill and dangerous.
Okay.
I won a few cases in the past that I don't think I would win today in today's climate, where I think the court acts more as a social worker almost than a judicial agency. I'll give an example. I had a client who was mentally ill, and he went to a gas station and he bought a 5-gallon can of gasoline, and he left the gas station and he walked to this restaurant, and in view of all of the customers that were sitting in the restaurant, he walked up to the outside wall and he poured out the can of gasoline, and then he stood back with his lighter and made motions that he was going to ignite the gasoline.
Right. Not friendly.
He got arrested. He got put into the system, and they tried to commit him as mentally ill and dangerous. He was definitely mentally ill. I was able to convince the court at that time that he hadn't completed the act, that waving the cigarette lighter wasn't an attempt to light the gasoline. But that was like over 30 years ago. I don't think the court would buy my argument today based on lots of recent decisions I've seen come down.
Yeah.
The one that you're, I think, are aware of is a young man who was out of Washington County who was mentally ill. And who harbored thoughts about injuring or killing neighbors. And he had made plans. He had gotten a bag together, he had gotten a knife together, he had gotten tape together, he had gone over and to a neighbor's house, and he had broken the outside pane of a sliding glass door. But once he broke the glass, he changed his mind and left. And he did not even break the inside pane, so he didn't even make an entry into the house.
Right.
But yet the court found that his preparations was an attempt. I still think that decision's wrong, but it gives you an idea of how far the courts will go to potentially protect the public.
Sure.
Well, in August of 2008, I broke a window and threatened to kill someone. It was more than just a threat, though. It was a plot to murder someone. I had even what they called a backpack murder kit in my car. Broke a window and ran away immediately, and was then obtained by the police the next night. I later on found out that the window I broke, there was another pane of glass behind it, so it was basically evident that I clearly didn't enter. And so through the legal process, I was charged with first-degree attempted murder, attempted burglary, harassment, and property damage. All four at the time were felonies. Got to a plea agreement of, got the attempted murder dropped, and got to a plea agreement of harassment and property damage, 2 gross misdemeanors instead of any felonies. Served like a accumulation of about 3 months in jail. Good time would be about 2 months, and served back-to-back of 2 combined sentences of 2 years probation, which was a 4-year probation period. And while on probation, I violated it 3 times. 2 times for drug abuse, 2 times for weapon possession. So the last time was drug abuse and weapon possession. Served 3 out of a 4-month sentence. And while I was awaiting, while I was serving that time in jail, awaiting my last probation violation, on my 21st golden birthday, my PO in the county of Washington County, filed for civil commitment as mentally ill and dangerous. And I had no idea what that was. And I learned through my civil lawyer, which was appointed to me, that there was a commitment process where I'd be sent to a place called St. Peter, Regional Treatment Center located in St. Peter, Minnesota, kept for the mentally ill and dangerous. And there was to be an extensive stay, what they considered to be an indeterminate amount of time. And so that was indeterminate, meaning like we're going to put you there until we deem you're ready to come out, which was kind of a long time. They said the average stay at that time was about anywhere from 6 to 10 years. Yeah, I got eventually committed, and so I went straight from jail to Anoka, but I was in Anoka for 5 days. I made a comment, the dialogue with something along the lines of I was having a normal conversation. I've been raised in a family where it's nice to get to know people, so I asked the staff, hey, you married, you have kids, what's your family life like? And that was Dean. She said, oh, I can't tell you that. I'm like, well, why not? It's not like I'm going to do anything inappropriate with it. So the next day they sent me to St. Peter due to that comment, because it was, I guess, too personal of a question to ask a staff member. I had no idea. And then I get to St. Peter, and that's what it's all about, is like you can't ask personal anything from anyone. It's all about knowing what you are and your personal information.
So a question for you. Did you know anything about St. Peter prior to all this happening? Like, did you ever in your life know about St. Peter before all this?
I've never heard of St. Peter Regional Treatment Center before, or even the town of St. Peter, which is, just north of Mankato, until I actually went there. I had been treatment facilities for a maximum of a week prior, in prior incidences, trying to get myself some sort of treatment inside hospitalizations with bedding issues, and the fact that my case was so high profile, they didn't really want to keep me there. And I never heard of this maximum security hospital at St. Peter, no.
What was your first initial thought when you got there?
Driving in, there was a guard gate. You go up this hill and you see all these buildings covered in barbed wire and fencing with bars on the window. You go in to the first building, you hear this like gunshot loud lock get unlocked on the first door. You get patted in through a metal detector, and then go through a second door, which is again shotgun sound of a lock being undone, and go through some hallways where there's a bunch of clients being escorted by staff, some with shackles, some without, some with one staff, some with multiple clients and few staff. And then I went into my unit, and there I was outside my barred window was a bunch of barbed wire on north unit, and there was and then beyond the barbed wire was like the rest of the world. And there was ICS, which is like an incident contained something. What's it called again?
Incident Command System.
ICS, which stands
formerly
for...
called a panic.
Right. When I first got there, there was an ICS, which stands for Incident Command Situation.
Our system, yeah.
Incident Command
System.
Incident Command System. Which I didn't even learn what that stood for. I just knew that when there's an ICS, I learned very quickly that you go to your room, you get locked down, and you wait for the incident or situation to be calm. You can peer through your little window and watch the client getting tackled by numerous staff that outweighed and measured every client pretty much.
So, let me ask you this. You were in jail, you said, right? Prior to all this?
Correct.
If you had to compare to where you were as jail and to this place as St. Peter, how would you compare that? Because this is mental health we're talking about, St. Peter.
Right. It's ironic because they call it a security hospital, and you would think that at a hospital you would get some sort of hospitality care or some sort of treatment and hospital regimen. In comparison to jail was you go in, you sit in your cell. When you get out at X hours on Washington County, they had so many hours you could be out and just in the main area watching television. You never got to go outside in jail, but you would never stay more than like a couple months to up to 6 or 8 months. I think the most I ever heard anyone serving in jail time was a year. But at least with that, when you're getting out. You have a set date, and you're basically counting down to the day you get out. With the security hospital, you're just there, and you're there, and you have no idea when you're getting out, and the best guess is years away. And even when you're towards the end of it, it could still be many months or years away. You just never know. The process is they have this leveling system of numbers, starting you off as a 1, going all the way to like a 5B to pass plan. And there's like there's a 1, there's a 2, there's a 3A, a 3B, a 4A, a 4B, a 5 pass plan, or excuse me, a 5A, 5B, 5 pass plan. It goes on forever, and there's a minimum. When I first got there, you weren't allowed to even request an upgrade from one level to the next without at least 45 days period between the last span of when you got your last privilege to the next. And each level, aside from 1 and 2, I find very little difference between that. I think it was the number of security guards you go with anytime you leave the campus or go in the halls. But aside from those 2 leveling systems, there was a slight security reduction through the process.
So let me ask you this. When you were there, what were other patients like? I mean, what was the mentality like?
The environment of the living situation of the clients that in my experience it was very broad. At first, there were people that are just like you and me, that are fairly coherent and aware of the situation, yet very misunderstood, such as they're just there, quote unquote, serving their time, but till what end, no one knows. And they would be just, in my opinion, as normal as people would get, because they could sit there, play cards, and then there are very few, I would say about 20% of the clientele, at least on my unit, which was a YAP program, a young adult adolescent program. There was very few that were quote unquote violent. They had a very rare occasion, and it fluctuated, granted, from once a month to once a week or twice a week, of incidences of these ICS incidences where they would either get verbally aggressive, which was 90% of the time when there was an ICS, it was verbal aggression, to throwing of food trays, breaking of televisions. I think once or twice there was a fight, like a physical fight with other clients, a throwing of a cup, and then that was an automatic like drop and level. You're put in a segregated pod, and it's right outside the unit, so you walk by anytime you're coming in and out of the unit, you just see this little empty cell with a mattress in there, and if that, and they're just sitting there, and there's nothing but concrete walls around. It's not even like the padded room and straitjacket as they advertise on television. But I'd say the worst part is actually the clientele were being chemically lobotomized. And what I mean by that is that they were being given such high dose of such old-fashioned medication that they would go from active to straight up sleeping. Like they would sit in a chair. There was this one individual that would day in, day out, you're obligated to go to these so-called groups that are supposed to be part of the treatment that they take you to, which is no education. And if it is education, you don't really get any certificates. At least for myself, being already a high school grad, I never advanced schooling because they had zero internet and zero way of doing college education. But they had these groups, and if you didn't go to the groups and participate, meaning suck up to the staff, or, yeah, everything's hunky-dory, y'all-la-di-da, it's a grand day. If you didn't do that, then you wouldn't progress through treatment, aka your time in getting out would not be looking closer in sight. These other clients that were being chemically lobotomized would just sit there, drool, and may have their eyes open, but never really focusing on anything. They were often some other world in their head, or being chemically stupefied.
So, just a question to come back to. You said stuff about an ICS, Incident Command Situation
System.
Whatever. So, when you saw it, if you've ever seen like one, I mean, I'm sure you have actually seen one, what did it look like? What did everything happen with? Or, yeah, you know what I mean.
Well, initially, if there was an ICS called, I got there in late 2010 and stayed, December 2010 was when I was admitted. And so there was those initial ICSs were treated like such a severe offense. It would be anything range from just yelling or raising your voice, saying, "This frickin' sucks, I want the hell out of here," and then the staff going, "Okay, well, we're gonna call an ICS," and that means a whole shitload of fucking staff come in, 9 times out of 10 tackle your ass for no apparent reason.
Like how many?
Anywhere from about 5 to 8 staff that are trained in security. That's one thing I didn't understand. They're called security counselors, and they're about 95% security and training, and 5% counselors with zero training other than a high school degree. That is the extent of their training. They have, they're considered counselors, yet they have no experience in communications, therapy, how to talk to people. They had no experience in that, no training whatsoever, other than possible of their own personal endeavors. The staff would just kind of be there as security more than anything. They were prison guards.
Can you elaborate more on the ICS?
Oh, right. There was this one incident with an individual. I don't know why I smile, probably because it's better off to smile than cry. But there's this one situation where if you refuse to take a medication and you are what is called Jarvis, which is a legal form that they will do whatever it takes to make sure that med gets in you. And they don't force a pill down your throat because they know you can just throw it up later. They will take the medication in liquid form and inject it. Well, guess where that's going? Up your ass. And there was an incident where an individual refused to take medication. He was Jarvis. And so what happened was they called an ICS. We all go to our rooms, shut our doors, look outside our little window, and hear this poor young adult yelling and screaming, "Rape! Help, help, they're raping me, help, they're raping me." While there's like 10 staff, 5 in his room, in his own private room, God knows what, probably, putting force on him, getting him to face his mattress face down, lie in his mattress face down, and pull down his pants and inject a needle in his ass so he'd get the appropriate medication dose that he was Jarvis to take. Jarvis, in my opinion, is a complete joke. If someone doesn't want to take their meds, and, that takes away a lot of liberal freedoms and rights that we had from the get-go.
Okay. How about... we touch base on a lot of things that are bad. Mm-hmm. And there's really a lot of bad things there. Can you say we have to kind of wrap up, but on an end note, is there anything good you can say about the hospital? There's got to be some good things.
Towards the end, after about 90% of your stay, they have these thing called passes, which is, there's 2 forms. There's passes to the city, which is like a pass with a peer mentor, an approved peer, or a local, or another peer, meaning clients that are in the system with you. And they take you downtown St. Peter, walking the designated streets to go to the library, go to the local cafe shop, local grocery store. And then there's the other part of the passes are called home passes, where you can take a night, up to a total, I think, of like 3 nights and 4 days away and spend time at home. That was the most human I felt in years. Being able to go home, be with my family for holidays and special occasions. Again, you can never leave the state, no matter what the circumstances. Your father died in a different state. That sucks to be you. You can't go to his funeral. My grandmother actually died when I was at the stay there, and I was lucky enough, if you want to consider it that, to Skype on my mom's computer at the library in St. Peter my grandmother's funeral.
Wow.
And say hi to all my loved ones through a little computer.
Well, I know. I know just again for people that might not be familiar with it. The commitment law is purely statutory. In other words, the state legislature passed the laws allowing the commitment system. And so those laws change periodically. And I can say from my roughly 40 years experience as a lawyer, 30 of which were basically doing commitment work, that the laws have tended to become easier to commit as opposed to being harder to commit. And I think that trend probably is going to continue a little bit. Again, it's a balancing act. There was an article in the paper, I think it might have been yesterday or Saturday, about a parent who had a 24-year-old adult son who was doing very well, educated, working, and then he came down with mental illness, and like many people that have mental illness, he didn't recognize the fact that he had a mental illness. He didn't think there was anything wrong with him. He saw no need for treatment. And for many parents who are in that situation, they try to get help for their child, whether it's an adult child or a juvenile. They try to get help, but the person who has a mental illness hasn't really done anything wrong to warrant the county stepping in and forcing treatment.
Right.
So the parents feel frustrated that there's no venue they can find to help their child. And when they become frustrated and they get enough of them, they become a political force. And that political force fights for easier commitment rules, easier forced drug medication. And over a course of time, the legislature lessens, and that's exactly what's taken place. They've added things to the commitment law that's made it easier to commit.
Right.
If you're a civil libertarian, you want to go the other way. My rights should be paramount. If I don't want to take medication and I'm not causing any trouble to anybody other than myself, I should be left alone. And here's our food.
Well, I'll explain a little bit of my past. A little bit leading up to this. Because there's a lot more than just the incident that, took place. And, the incident itself wasn't the final closing event that led me to go to St. Peter.
Really?
Yeah.
Expand on that some.
I will. The whole thing is can I get one of yours?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sweet, thanks. Okay, so I grew up, and when I grew up, I was living a very sheltered life. I lived, in the house because it was a very messed up neighborhood. So, I never had any friends and no social contact. And, I did, but very, very little from what I had. And the problem with that is that humans need social contact. And I would have problems with my family where I would lash out because I didn't know how to express myself because I've never seen, how to express it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So as time went on, the only thing I knew how to do was lash out at my family because I was, I'd get attention. A lot of time I get the way I get my way. And, I was just a really fucked up child. And, I grew up that way up until probably the time I was, and there was many incidences where I had been physical with my family because when I hit my teens, I was just the most angry person in the world because I felt like I had no purpose in life. I felt like I wasted all my young years sitting in a room playing a Nintendo system or I was sitting in my new house, which was in Richfield after we moved, and I was in a neighborhood at this time now where I could go out and meet people. Neighbors were really friendly. Everybody was cool. Whereas before I was in Minneapolis, and you just couldn't go outside your door without a gunshot being fired somewhere.
Right.
And I hated myself even more because as time went on, I was the person that imprisoned himself in a room and wanted contact but didn't want contact at the same time with people. So I would lash out at my mother and my father because I didn't know how to express it, I guess is the proper way of saying it. Because of, when you have a mental illness and you're young, you don't, especially when you're in your teens and young adults, you don't want to accept the fact that you have a mental illness. You want to believe that there's no such thing as mental illness. I know that when I heard mental illness, I thought it was like this bad frickin' thing. You were diseased. You were a leper.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be around a leper. And I just thought, why even try? So continuing on the part with my family, I would lash out on them because I felt like if I sabotaged myself, then maybe, I don't know, if I sabotage my life, then maybe I could just end it something. I didn't really want to be on the planet. But what happened was, when I acted out on my father, that was probably several instances later, which I'm really glad that did not succeed. I tried to strangle my dad with a necktie.
Well, strangling somebody doesn't mean you necessarily kill them. It just means you want them to pass out. And if you keep strangling them for about 3 or 4 minutes after they pass out, then they're dead. But usually when you grab somebody by their necktie, it's an expression of, I don't like you. It's not an expression of, I'm going to kill you until you do it for about 5 minutes nonstop. But I'm very aware of the fact that you feel remorse about the incident and just getting into a fight with your dad at all.
There's no excuse for what I did, and I'm being very sincere about it. There's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't kick myself in the ass for treating my family the way I did when I was growing up.
But what we have here, though, the problem that I see is the state spent $1.5 million to socialize you in a prison setting when they were unwilling to provide services for you until the problem got to one where the courts were involved. And so I just put the case simply to the people that if they spent $1.5 million in social services, they could have gotten a better product. And it would have been a lot more comfortable for you than going to prison for 10 years and being treated as an animal, which you're not. You're a human being, and you did your best to save Ed in a challenging situation. It turned out later that the reason he fell down was that he was drunk, and that this turned out to be the case because later on the same night he fell down again because he was drunk. But you jumped to the rescue and did your best superhero routine, and everything came out all right.
I wouldn't call me a hero, but I helped in a time of need. That's basically what it was.
Sure.
And, if my worst enemy in the whole world was sitting there laying on the floor, bleeding out, I would still help them.
Sure. Most of us would.
Right. I mean, I think humans, every human being deserves to live. Whether they have bad in them or good in them, I still think there's good in everybody. So, my point being is that I did no different than anybody else would if they were in my situation.
Sure.
So, but at the same time, though, now back to the commitment thing. When I went through the courts, now you got to remember, I was also I do suffer from bipolar type 2.
Okay.
And with bipolar type 2 has its manic ups and its depressive downs, which means 1 minute I'm up, when I'm not well, I'm up, and I'm just sleeping, never not sleeping. I don't sleep at all, and my mind's racing. I can't hold a thought. I'm like the attention span of a squirrel.
Sure.
And then, which is insulting to squirrel. And then if you go down to the depressive lows, you're just, you feel like that the world is caving in on you. And you feel like you're in this dark, black hole. And there's no way out. There's no one there. No one cares. Life is pointless kind of thing, you know?
Don't even feel like getting out of bed in the morning.
No, because you feel like you're just a lump of meat that doesn't deserve to be on the planet. That's what it feels like. Now, lately, well, okay, so the last probably 7 years, I've been right in the middle ground.
Cool.
So, I mean, yeah, I have my depressive moments, but I don't think I have had a manic since, like, 2008, 2009. And I was, placed in the hospital at the end of 2007. So, when I was going through the courts, I stayed at Abbott Northwestern for about 6 months, and which is way over the normal stay for anybody. And because they didn't want to put me in jail, which is a good thing. And, I mean, it's not a good thing I was there for that long, but it's better than I wouldn't last 10 seconds in jail.
I think you last at least 5 minutes.
Oh, well, that's a plus. So then after that little spew, they told me about St. Peter. I've never heard of St. Peter. I didn't even know. I mean, I've been through to Mankato many times with my grandmother and my family, but you go by this stretch of highway, and on the right side, when you're going towards Mankato, it's all trees, foliage and forest and all that earthy stuff. But damn it, my cigarette went on. Can I see your lighter? Oh, it's right here. But, like, when you go by it, you think, okay, there's nothing there. On the other side of that foliage and that wonderful little forest stuff, nature and animals, all warm fuzzies, there is the hospital. And I never knew that was there. It was like, so when I was taken, I was thinking I was just gonna go to like a place like, I don't know, like Abbott Northwestern. I didn't think it was gonna be this campus with several different buildings and, high security, maximum security, area, barbed wire and locked doors, and, it was scary.
Bulletproof glass.
Yeah. Bars. I mean, I understand it's for everybody's protection and whatnot, but coming from a person that's never been, in jail or prison, I haven't been to either. It was quite the initial shock for me.
Oh, definitely.
Because the rooms, you had a stone slab for your bed, and then you had a really thin mattress, and then your sink was part of your toilet, so it was like a steel, yeah. Imagine sitting on that in the winter. That sucked. But you had a steel toilet, complete steel, and then it came up, and then you had, the sink area, and then it came up even more, and you had a steel, polished to a shine, slab of metal, and that was your mirror.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the room was just complete stone. And then you had your windows, which was like
bulletproof glass
with bars on the other side. Yeah. And there's no way in hell I'll ever go back to that. So I got there and I just about shit my pants. And so I was there for 9 years. Treatment's treatment. I mean, I'm not really too keen on how they did it, but at the same time, and this is gonna sound counterproductive to the video and whatnot, but it did help me. Not the treatment didn't help me. It was more like boot camp. In the sense of, like, you know, everything is taken away from you. Like, I had everything before I came in, and I didn't care about anything. Because I had everything, and I was a spoiled little brat. Like, I snapped my fingers, I had it. You know, and I had stuff in my room that was piled to the ceiling sometimes, and I didn't care and respect anything of it. Well, when I went in, everything was stripped of me. I couldn't even have CDs. We had to have tape cassettes at that time. And you start to appreciate what very little life has to offer. And, well, I don't know how you say it. I mean, life has the little things in life, the tad little things, like people. You know, people, I mean, yeah, they may have been crazy there, but interactions with people was a real big thing. And then as you progress through the program, you got more things. You know, but they weren't just like, here, you can have everything back at one go. You slowly, you know, progressed. Like when I got down to Johnson Hall, which is the second step, you go security, or maximum security, minimum security, and then no security. And Johnson Hall is the middle security. When I was
Well,
up...
Bartlett Hall is the middle security.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bartlett Hall, yeah.
Johnson Hall is a place with no barbed wire.
Yeah, that's no security, basically. At least closer you're gonna get. But, when I was in Bartlett Hall, I was allowed to have an Xbox. I mean, yeah, they were very limited to what you could have. Like, you had to have an Xbox without internet, because they were afraid if you had Wi-Fi that you could access the internet and do stuff, I don't know what, but God forbid. So, you know, I could have a PlayStation 2 or an Xbox without internet service. You know, and that was really cool, because I'm a big gamer. I play lots of video games. And when I was able to play video games, I was kind of able to escape into my own little world.
Cool.
So that helped me through it. But I think at this point in time, what really helped me when I got out, I mean, I have my own room now. I have a room. My own room. No matter what I did when I was there, no matter where I lived when I was in St. Peter, I shared a room with somebody. I always did that, and it pissed me off because you never got any privacy. And, you know, I mean, you couldn't have... You had to share half a room, which was really small. And now I have my own room. I can go in my room. I can lay down. And it's peaceful. I have my own window that I can open, and I can listen to the rain at night when it rains. I have a closet. I have a TV. I pay my own bills. I mean, these are things. I mean, I think I'm paid off on credit card debt, but I mean, I have credit card debt. I'm living the American dream, you know, debt, bills, and, you know, life. You know? So, surprisingly, I'm more independent now than I've ever been in my life.
You appreciate it more.
I do. I appreciate it so much more. But I'm not saying that the treatment or the place there was good. I'm just saying that it was a scared straight program for me.
Sure.
It was. It was enough to scare me. Like, I was scared to step out of line. I never got into fights or anything, or got into a hold. I had an incident with a guy that tackled me, but that was about it. Ultimately, though, there was, one of the guys was egging me on or something, and I yelled at him, and he jumped on me and started beating me, but that was it. And then, it's kind of weird, you know?
Yeah.
The whole fact that there's this world inside of a world. The campus is its own little thing. It's its own entity. You have shops on that campus. You have a trading post where you can get your clothes. You have a kitchen that makes all your food. You have jobs on the campus that you work in the kitchen. You have a cantina where you can go to the cantina and buy your food if you need, and your soap supplies and your general stuff and everything. It has schooling, which wasn't really schooling. It was just to get your GED or whatnot, which I got my GED. I got my GED there. And then let's see what else. You had your exercise and fitness area there in a different building. That was
Tomlinson.
Yeah, Tomlinson. Yeah, they had a pool there, and
Which is now empty because they haven't got enough money to fix it.
Yeah,
It leaks.
That's unfortunate because that was a really, really nice pool. It was a beautiful pool. And then they have a gym where you could play basketball. They had a weightlifting room. They had all these facilities, and you didn't have to go anywhere. You didn't. You really had to go nowhere. If you wanted to order food, you could order, a pizza or Chinese food. God forbid, their Chinese, Chinatown and their wonderful shrimp toast. I'll never forget their shrimp toast. But, it's just so self-sustained.
Contained.
That's
Self-contained.
Self-contained, thank you. And the sad thing is that people stay there. I knew a person that was there for 40 plus years, and he was there from when he was a teen, or I think even more than that. And he was there, and he never saw the light of day. Well, I mean, he never got out of the campus. So, I mean, for me, it was harsh just being 9 years. Because when I went in, I had my first and most favorite phone in the world, which was an LG Chocolate. It was the biggest and best technology you could ever ask for. And then when I got out, there's these things now that are smartphones. I don't even know how to operate a smartphone. They don't teach you how to use a smartphone. My computer...
You're very good at using a smartphone. You're very good at a computer. You're a savant in the sense that you did all the editing for this film.
I get it, though, but I had to relearn everything. Because
you relearned it, yes.
But I mean, I'm just saying, when I exited St. Peter, my knowledge was 10 years ago.
Sure.
And in technology sense, technology, 1 year is like 1 week. Or even 1 year is like 1 month sometimes when it comes to technology's consideration. Mm-hmm. So it passes, I mean, you can't even fathom 9 years. Yeah. I mean, when I went in, my very best computer was a Pentium 4 dual core. Now I can't even imagine, I have a i7 with Windows 10 and, all this stuff on it, and I'm still trying to understand half of it. I mean, I understand the bulk of it, but not everything. It's just...
Well, let's take a moment and talk about...
Feral. The definition of feral is from a wild state, something not domesticated. We are seeing mental health commitments now for people who do not have genuine mental illnesses, but are wild feral people in a needy state for what amounts to a
government takeover of the role of parenting. These people come into the inner city or suburbs with no real job skills, spotty employment history, a sweet tooth for drugs, and breeding habits heavily dependent on social welfare resources. What gets them involved in the law is they get into a fist fight every month or get into drugs and alcohol and end up with a rap sheet an arm long. We get them into our confines and it puts them on tranquilizers and slowly come to the realization that their lifestyle is heavily dependent on tomes like, if I don't stand up for myself, he's going to punk me, so I got to beat him down. I'm not the one who's going to get punked, and if I have anything to say in the matter, that's what I'm going to do. I think that means our prison mentality is spilling over into our inner city culture. In essence, we are now using mental health resources to cure people of the disease of poverty and living in a wild, feral, unparented state. A new crime is being invented where we are convicting people of the supposed crime of not having suburban domesticated lifestyles. The Constitution was never written to deal with mental health commitments or feral inner city kids or suburban kids on drugs capable of getting handguns that in turn can spray 30 bullets into a liquor store in 10 seconds. In the days of Washington, Franklin, and Jefferson, there was no consciousness of inner city decay or drugs or street crime. The weapon of the day was a Brown Bess musket that could be reloaded in a minute. Now the wild child of the inner city gets on drugs at age 11, gets his first gun at 13. Using mental health resources to treat people for the disease of being inner city street thugs or suburban kids on drugs is a misapplication of resources. We end up spending $150,000 a year for their detention and rehabilitation, while prison costs $60,000 a year, and social services in the community cost far less than that. I don't think the Constitution was designed to reform inner city street crime culture or suburban kids on drugs. This addendum to our film is exclusively for the judges of Hennepin County Court and the mental health divisions. There's a chronic problem in the mental health of filing false evidence and charges to exaggerate offenses and either rid society of the offender or, more commonly, to get family members or loved ones a form of help rather than prison. No matter how well intended this concept is, it involves false claims in a court where the accused lives under the delusions that they actually have civil rights and rights to a fair trial. The result is treatment centers end up designing treatment plans based on false reports. The accused is treated for mental illnesses that they don't have, while the real illnesses go untreated. In the end, the accused is charged with being paranoid. When the accused denies this, the accused is told that his complaint of a false charge of paranoia is itself proof of his paranoia. Some therapists are sensitive to the fact that these false charges exist and stress the revision of treatment plans to reflect the fact that while the original charges might be a fraud, the end result is one may be able to benefit from treating the illnesses that are a reality under the idea, while you are here, you might as well reap the benefit. The real question for our judges is, if this feral state exists, does it constitute a bona fide mental illness? Suburban kids can be feral just as much as our inner city street urchins. Being feral denotes a behavioral health problem, but it has nothing to do with a medical disease like mental illness. Judges beware.
The Pinky and the Brain, yes, Pinky and the Brain. One is a genius, the other's insane. They're laboratory mice, their genes have been spliced. They're Pinky and the Brain, 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 brain. Before each night is done, their plan will be unfurled by the dawning of the sun. They'll take over the world. each night is done, their plan will be unfurled by the dawning of the sun. They'll take over the world. They're Pinky and the Brain. Yes, Pinky and the Brain. Their twilight campaign is easy to explain. To prove their mousy worth, they'll overthrow the earth. They're Dinky, they're Pinky and the Brain.